The barn was barely standing. Rain leaked through the broken roof as Nathan Bennett wiped sweat from his brow, gripping the worn handle of his hammer. Eleanor Westbrook watched him work, her expression unreadable. "You fix things without asking questions, don't you, Mr. Bennett?" she asked, her voice calm, yet carrying a hint of curiosity. Nathan smiled wryly. "I don't ask questions when I need the money." But perhaps he should have. Nathan took a deep breath, filling his lungs with crisp autumn air as he stepped out of his old pickup truck. The small rental house at the edge of Riverdale wasn't much, but it represented a fresh start, a place where he and his son Jacob could begin building something resembling a home. Jacob, a spirited 7-year-old with boundless energy, jumped down from the truck, his sneakers crunching against the gravel driveway. His wide, curious eyes scanned their surroundings before turning to his father with an excited grin. "Dad, do you think there's buried treasure here?" he asked, bouncing on his heels. Nathan chuckled, ruffling his son's messy blonde hair. "Maybe not treasure, but I have a feeling we'll find something good in this town." They had arrived in Riverdale just the day before, and though Nathan had barely begun unpacking, work was already waiting. A job offer had come through from a woman named Eleanor Westbrook, owner of an old farm on the outskirts of town. She needed someone to repair a weathered barn on her property, and Nathan, a skilled carpenter by trade, had eagerly accepted. Work was work, and for a man who had spent the last few years drifting from one odd job to another, it was exactly what he needed. As Nathan drove down the winding country road leading to the Westbrook farm, he couldn't help but admire the scenery. Fields of golden wheat stretched across the horizon, swaying gently under the cool breeze. The trees lining the road blazed with autumn colors, painting the landscape in fiery reds and oranges. Riverdale felt different from the places he had passed through before. There was something quiet and steady about it, a kind of stillness that settled deep in the bones. When the Westbrook farm came into view, Nathan slowed the truck, taking in the sprawling land. The farmhouse was a charming relic from another time, with white wooden panels and a wraparound porch. A few feet away stood the barn he'd been hired to repair, its red paint faded and the roof sagging in places, but the structure itself had good bones. Waiting near the barn was a woman dressed in a flannel shirt, jeans, and sturdy work boots. She stood with her arms crossed, studying the barn with quiet intensity. As Nathan climbed out of the truck, the woman turned toward him. She had long chestnut hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, and a face that was striking, not in an ostentatious way, but in a manner that made you want to keep looking. There was a quiet strength in her eyes that carried untold stories. "Nathan Bennett?" she asked, her voice even and steady. He nodded, extending a calloused hand. "That's me. You must be Eleanor Westbrook." She shook his hand firmly. "I appreciate you coming out so soon. The barn's seen better days, but I'd like to keep it standing for a few more years if possible." Nathan glanced at the structure. "Shouldn't be a problem. Mind if I take a closer look?" Eleanor gestured for him to go ahead, and he stepped inside. The scent of aged wood and hay filled the air as beams of sunlight streamed through the gaps in the roof. He ran his fingers along one of the support beams, tapping it lightly. "Solid. A good sign." "The framework is still strong," he said, turning to her, "but the roof needs reinforcing, and some of these boards should be replaced before winter sets in." Eleanor nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'll help wherever I can. I'm not much of a carpenter, but I can hold a hammer." Nathan smirked. "Not many landowners I've worked for are willing to get their hands dirty." "I don't like standing around," she replied simply. That Nathan could respect. As they discussed repair plans, Jacob wandered around the property, kicking at fallen leaves with the enthusiasm only a child could muster. Near the farmhouse, he spotted a small, scruffy dog curled up under the porch steps. "Dad, look!" Jacob called out. He crouched down, extending a cautious hand toward the dog. The animal sniffed him hesitantly before its tail wagged in approval. Eleanor chuckled. "That's Rusty. He showed up one day and decided to stay. I don't think he belongs to anyone." "Can I keep him?" Jacob asked, his eyes shining with hope. Nathan hesitated. They were still settling in, and taking on a pet was a big responsibility. But the way Jacob clung to the little dog, the way Rusty leaned into his touch as if they had known each other forever, Nathan couldn't bring himself to say no. Eleanor smiled. Rusty's been looking for a friend. I think he just found one. Nathan glanced at her, seeing something unspoken in her expression, a quiet understanding. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the farm, Nathan found himself lingering longer than he had intended. There was something about this place, about the way Eleanor spoke of it with such devotion, about the way Jacob had already made himself at home, that made him pause. He had spent years running, searching for a place where he and Jacob could belong. Maybe Riverdale was that place. Maybe this farm with its weathered barn and its quiet, resolute owner was the start of something new. Eleanor, watching him from the corner of her eye, felt a similar hesitation. She had been alone for so long, used to keeping people at arm's length, but Nathan and Jacob carried something with them, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. As Nathan loaded Jacob into the truck, Eleanor found herself speaking before she could stop. I make a mean apple pie, she said. If you're still around this weekend, maybe you and Jacob would like to stop by. Nathan met her gaze, a slow smile spreading across his face. We'd like that. As he drove away, Eleanor watched the dust settle behind his truck, a strange feeling blooming in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, something had begun to take root. The rhythmic sound of a hammer striking wood echoed through the quiet morning air as Nathan focused on his work. The barn had seen better days, but as he secured a fresh wooden plank against one of the support beams, he could already see the structure beginning to regain its strength. The sun had barely risen above the treetops, but he had started early. Years of carpentry had taught him that morning was the best time to work. The air was cool, the world still, and he could lose himself in the steady, methodical rhythm of his craft. Somewhere behind him, the crunch of boots on gravel signaled Eleanor's approach. She had made good on her promise to help, though he was still surprised she had insisted. Most landowners he had worked for in the past had preferred to supervise from a distance, offering little more than the occasional comment about his progress. But not Eleanor. Coffee? She asked, stepping up beside him and holding out a thermos. Nathan set his hammer down and accepted the cup she poured. The rich aroma of black coffee curled into the air between them. He took a sip, nodding his approval. Strong, Eleanor smirked. I don't do weak coffee. Nathan glanced at her, noting the way her sharp green eyes scanned the barn with a mixture of scrutiny and fondness. She wasn't just looking at the structure, she was remembering. This place must mean a lot to you, he remarked. She hesitated before answering. It's been in my family for generations. My grandfather built this barn with his own hands. My parents kept it running. I spent my childhood here, running through these fields, learning how to ride horses before I could even ride a bike. Her voice softened, tinged with something heavier. But it's different now, she added. It's just me. Nathan didn't push for more. He understood loss. He had lived with it for years. Instead, he took another sip of coffee and returned his focus to the barn. Well, lucky for you, this place still has good bones. With a little work, it'll stand for years to come. She gave him a small, appreciative nod. That's the hope. For the next few hours, they worked side by side. Nathan handled most of the heavy lifting, while Eleanor assisted where she could, holding beams in place, measuring planks, passing him tools. She wasn't as practiced as he was, but she was willing to learn, and that counted for something. It was rare to find someone willing to put in the work for something they cared about. By mid-morning, Jacob arrived with Rusty trotting happily at his heels. The boy had insisted on bringing the dog to the farm, declaring that Rusty was now officially his business partner. Business partner? Eleanor asked, amused. Jacob nodded seriously. Yep. Dad fixes things and I make sure nobody slacks off. Nathan chuckled. Guess I better stay on my toes then. Jacob's presence brought a lightness to the air. He explored the barn with the same enthusiasm he approached everything, asking endless questions about the tools, the wood, and the structure itself. "Will this barn be like new when you're done?" Jacob asked, tilting his head as he examined the half-repaired wall. Nathan considered the question. "Not new, but strong. Some things aren't meant to be replaced, just reinforced." Eleanor glanced at him at that as if she understood the meaning behind his words. As they worked, Nathan noticed the way Eleanor avoided mentioning her family in too much detail, the way her jaw tensed slightly whenever she spoke about the farm's history. Riverdale was a small town. Rumors traveled fast. He had already picked up pieces of the story from casual conversations at the diner. The Westbrook family had once been one of the wealthiest landowners in the area. Eleanor's father had expanded the business, making smart investments, turning a simple farm into something grand. But after his death, things had changed. The estate had been left to Eleanor, but she had no interest in the wealth, the influence, the expectations that came with the Westbrook name. She had rejected the idea of selling the land to developers, despite pressure from corporate buyers. Instead, she had chosen this life, a quiet existence tending to the land, keeping the farm running on her own terms. Nathan respected that. It wasn't easy to walk away from what the world expected of you. As the afternoon wore on, dark clouds gathered in the distance. The wind picked up, sending leaves skittering across the ground. Eleanor looked toward the sky. "Looks like we've got a storm coming." Nathan nodded. "We should wrap up for the day. This old barn won't do well in high winds." Jacob groaned. "But we were just getting started." Eleanor smiled. "The barn will still be here tomorrow." Reluctantly, the boy gathered his things, while Nathan secured their work for the night. By the time they were ready to leave, the first drops of rain had begun to fall. As Nathan turned toward his truck, Eleanor hesitated. Then in a voice that was almost too quiet to hear over the rising wind, she said, "You and Jacob should come by for dinner sometime. It's been a while since this house had company." Nathan met her gaze. There was something open and honest in the way she said it. No pretense, no formality, just a simple invitation. "Yeah," he said. "I think we'd like that." Eleanor nodded once, then turned toward the farmhouse. Nathan watched her go, something stirring in his chest that he couldn't quite name. The storm rolled in, and as he drove home with Jacob chattering in the seat beside him, he couldn't shake the feeling that despite the clouds, despite the uncertainty, something about Riverdale felt a little more like home. Eleanor Westbrook stood on her porch the next evening, watching as Nathan's truck pulled up the gravel driveway. She had spent the morning preparing, cleaning the house, cooking a meal, even putting fresh flowers on the dining table. It had been years since she'd had proper dinner guests, and she found herself oddly nervous. "They're here," she called into the house, as if there was someone else to hear. The emptiness of her own voice echoing back reminded her why this dinner mattered so much. Nathan helped Jacob out of the truck, Rusty bounding ahead of them toward the porch. The dog had clearly decided that the Westbrook farm was his second home. "We brought pie," Jacob announced, carefully carrying a bakery box. "Dad said we couldn't come empty-handed." Eleanor smiled, crouching down to accept the box. "That was very thoughtful." "Thank you." Inside, the farmhouse was warm and inviting. Eleanor had prepared a simple meal: pot roast, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread. It wasn't fancy, but it was homemade, and the aroma filled the kitchen. "This looks amazing," Nathan said, taking in the spread. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble." "It's no trouble," Eleanor replied, though it had been. She couldn't remember the last time she'd cooked a proper meal for anyone besides herself. They settled around the table, and for a moment Eleanor was struck by how right it felt, having voices other than her own filling the space, having someone pass the salt without being asked, having a child's laughter bounce off the aged wooden walls. "Miss Eleanor?" Jacob asked between bites. "Do you get lonely out here all by yourself?" "Jacob," Nathan said, giving his son a look, but Eleanor shook her head. "It's all right." She considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I do. But I have the land, the animals, memories." "My mom died," Jacob said matter-of-factly. "Sometimes I get lonely for her, even though I don't remember her much." Eleanor felt her heart twist. "I'm sorry, Jacob." Dad said she's still with us, just not where we can see her. Like the seeds we planted. They're growing even though we can't see them yet. Eleanor glanced at Nathan, who was looking at his son with a mixture of pride and pain. She understood that look all too well. After dinner, while Jacob explored the bookshelf in the living room, Nathan helped Eleanor clear the table. Their hands brushed as they reached for the same plate, and Eleanor felt something flutter in her chest, a feeling she had almost forgotten. "Thank you," Nathan said quietly, "for including us tonight. It means a lot to Jacob, and to me." Eleanor nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She had built walls around herself for so long, had convinced herself that solitude was safer. But standing in her kitchen with Nathan Bennett, watching his son turn the pages of her grandfather's old atlas, she wondered if she had been wrong. Later, as they stood on the porch saying goodnight, the moon casting silver light across the fields, Eleanor felt a sense of possibility she hadn't allowed herself in years. "The barn's coming along well," Nathan said, hands in his pockets. "Should be finished by the end of the week." Eleanor nodded, trying not to think about what that meant, that soon there would be no reason for him to keep coming back. "What will you do after?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Nathan looked out at the fields, then back at her. "I don't know. We haven't stayed in one place very long these past few years." "Riverdale seems nice," Eleanor offered, her voice quiet. "Yeah," Nathan agreed, his eyes meeting hers. "It does." As their truck disappeared down the driveway, Eleanor stood on the porch long after the taillights had faded from view. The farm felt different somehow, as if the boundaries of her solitary existence had been redrawn, making room for something new. Back in the house, she noticed Jacob had left his jacket behind. She picked it up, holding it for a moment before hanging it by the door. A reason for them to return, she thought with a small smile. Outside, the wildflower seeds they had planted together lay beneath the soil, unseen but full of potential. Eleanor thought about what Jacob had said about his mother, present even if invisible. Perhaps hope worked the same way, buried deep until circumstances allowed it to grow. Tomorrow, Nathan would return to work on the barn. Tomorrow, she would help him, passing tools and holding beams. Tomorrow, they would continue building something neither had planned for, but both could feel taking shape between them. Eleanor closed the door and went to bed, sleeping better than she had in years. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others who need a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected connections lead to the most meaningful beginnings.